technology issues?
The mayor didn't pay the power bill, that's what it is.
I always pay the power
Ah.
bill.
I think he's got it. No, we actually know how the power bill's paid. We heard that.
That's right.
We heard that.
That's right.
Exactly how the power bill's
Yes.
paid.
Yeah, and evidently Dan Jody.
So nice.
Either way.
And I don't think you had anything to do with that.
No, I don't think so.
We got some hamburgers.
So can we set up this new rule for the people session where you can only speak if you haven't already said something before?
I agree. I second. Third.
You understand?
You got it the first 6 times you said it? Oh, we say. Sorry.
Can we?
You elected the wrong chairman, baby. You want to speak, we're going to listen.
That Mary Cronin, she does not look like. Not
Not yet.
You know, he's... Yes. And that picks up his...
great.
Has he got the sound working yet? Oh, that's too bad.
What was it that I was doing when it was
Have we got it, Peter?
Is it working?
Oh, they don't do it till they...
It's right here.
Don't do that till
Spread the prongs on the plug a little bit. Try it.
You'll catch it.
You know how many times that works?
Yes, because I gotta replace the plug.
Exactly.
You guys my father
You just wet your finger.
Hold on, let me test it.
Yeah, here, hold my hand. Let's put it very, very...
You know what? Get rid of the extension cord as well. We're ready to go.
We're ready to go?
We're ready to go. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. Thank everyone for showing up tonight. If I could, with the secretary, please read the roll.
Robert Kane, I think he's going to be absent tonight, Mr. Chairman. Carla Morano is present, Joan Mead is present, Mary Comstock is present, Paul Swenson is present, Mary Cronin, Diane Cervello present, Edward Torian is present.
Okay. And the minutes from the last meeting? Peter, would you like to read those?
Sure.
Thank you.
Our last meeting was Monday, June 23rd. At that meeting, the entire commission was present. We had discussion, we accepted the minutes from the May 14, 2008 meeting. We heard input from the public. Joel Brooks spoke in favor of separate planning and zoning commissions and asked that the bonding thing be made clear as bonds above a certain amount should go to referendum and no one should have unlimited access to credit. Mr. Warren Levy spoke about the capital budgeting process and submitted a sample capital budgeting process. He mentioned the city's emergency fund has a balance of approximately $26 million. He spoke in favor of eliminating the city clerk's office, which is not a statutory office. And he urged the legislative side of government be balanced and independent. He also spoke against term limitations and in favor of the 2-year term for all elective offices. He pointed out that he's in favor of making the capital budget come out of the mayor's office. Joe Uri spoke in favor of a longer term for the town clerk, in favor of a cap on non-referendum bonding, because there are projects that should be taken in front of the people, and he was against combining the planning and zoning commissions. Lynn Waller spoke about, asked us to remember the public and city government, and in doing no harm, and against combining the planning and zoning commissions. Mr. Ben Chinesi spoke in favor of a cap on non-referendum budgeting, and that should say bonding, and against combining planning and zoning commissions. He was in favor of a 4-year term for the town clerk and in favor of a 2-year term for everyone else. The commission had an extended discussion with Jean Natale, the city clerk of Danbury. She provided the commission with a brief history of the position of city clerk, stressed the importance of having at least 2 people with the knowledge of the duties presently performed by the city clerk. She detailed the many different and separate tasks she performs as city clerk. She stressed the importance of an assistant as there should be more than one person who shares the knowledge of the role. She spoke of her accomplishments in the position and the need to change the name of the position, as there is much confusion with the public as to the position and duties of city clerk. She discussed the increasing expense the city incurs in using the News Times for official notices, and thought there might be another way to effectively give notice without using the News Times. She urged that we look at some of the tasks the council performs and streamline them and she gave an example of the process for sewer and water connections. She suggested that the city clerk's position should remain and remain elected, as it's more accountable. She also spoke in favor of 4-year elected terms for all office holders. The commission also had a discussion with Dan Jowdy, the treasurer of the city of Danbury. He discussed his position as custodian of city funds and overseer of all city disbursements. He views himself as an extra set of eyes over the expenditure of city money. He reviews every disbursement that the city makes. The commission agreed to discuss term lengths of the office of city clerk, the office of treasurer, and combining the planning and zoning commissions at its next meeting. Those are the minutes. I noticed there are some typos in this.
Okay, so the one correction is, the section under Mr. Chianese, we're changing the word budgeting to bonding.
Yes.
Okay, did you have anything else that?
Well, that's a significant one. It has the meaning in town clerk.
Yeah. And under Mr. Levy's section, I think that last line, when he talked about making the capital budget come out of the mayor's office, I think he meant earlier. He was looking more for timetables so that the council would have a chance to, it wasn't, because the capital budget does come out of the mayor's office now, I think. So I think the word earlier would probably describe what that was. Any other corrections? The minutes stand as read. We'll open the floor to the public. Would anyone like to address us? Mr. Uris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick topics tonight. I understand there was a report issued, or excerpts, very limited excerpts of a report from an ad hoc meeting about 4 years ago, dealing with permits and planning process that was given to the commission members. I did read through that. Since it was such a, I think, only the conclusions were in there. The only thing I could read between the lines of the reasons that they came to the conclusions that they did was that there was a limited amount of property for development in Danbury now. Maybe it made sense just to combine those functions. I would contend that the opposite is true. Because there is more limited amount of property for development, you need all the eyes you can on those pieces of property and those development projects. From what I've seen coming through the planning commission, there's all kinds of shenanigans that try to get pushed through one way or the other. So it's back to, I think, the bulk of the testimony which has been before this commission. And I don't think that these kinds of individuals must have testified in that subcommittee that too much power and too few people. We need eyes and we need counterbalances. The second one I wanted to talk about was the term limits and term of office. I spoke about one or two of the offices. I think I also spoke about the mayor's office in addition to the town clerk's office as probably making sense for 4 years. On giving that more thought, I still think that makes sense, but in city politics, we have such a difficult time getting the constituency to participate. I think you need to do all or none. All of the offices should be elected offices should be 4-year terms, or none. If we start getting miscellaneous commissions and/or other top-of-the-ticket seats running in 2 years, council may be running at 2 years, mayors and others running at 4 years, I think you're going to see a tremendous drop-off in participation in those off years. So I would just contend all or none. And my thinking is 4 is probably more appropriate than 2 for this town. That's all I have to say this time. Thank you very much for taking the first half of the meeting.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the commission? Warren?
I think I'd be a regular visitor here. Warren Levy, 5 Pilgrim Drive, Danbury. I'd like to speak to the 2 issues on the agenda, one of them being the merging of the planning and the zoning commission. I think that in listening to Paul Jaber, who's probably one of the major land use attorneys in the city of Danbury, and his comments of a center of power, too much power centered in one combined commission, I agree with him wholeheartedly, and I won't be repetitious to talk about all of the other factors involved. Although I would be interested in hearing any positive reason why you would join the two commissions. I've heard a lot of negative, but I've heard very little as far as positive, and I did go back over all your minutes and didn't see too much related to that. So the other issue is the city clerk's position, and I listened very attentively to her comments from the last meeting, and I want to assure her and this commission that it's not a personal attack. The charter is the process that our government operates by, and we try to make it as efficient as possible. And if there is extra expense or lack of efficiencies, the charter should spell out the way to go forward. It's not a personal one, although I understand it could be for political reasons, and I think the office originally evolved for political reasons. So that I did form a letter, which I'll submit to you, and I'll read the letter, and that is, currently there are no statutory requirements to have the elected city clerk. The position was retained when the city and the town of Danbury consolidated. Without a measurement of job proficiency, the statement in the charter that says the city clerk shall be the clerk of the council has no value with respect to the delegation of task. It should also be noted the city clerk is not answerable to any other office. As an elected official, the city clerk sets his or her own hours and is not bound by any direct supervision. This is probably the reason the charter authorizes the common council to appoint assistant city clerks. The charter only specifies 3 responsibilities of the city clerk. 1, the city clerk shall keep for public inspection copies of every proposed ordinance and record of all proceedings, including roll call votes. 2, all records so kept shall be authenticated by such clerk or president of the council, or both. And 3, the council shall be responsible, the clerk, shall be responsible for publication of such notices and of hearings and publications of ordinance as may be necessary, and perform such other duties as the council may determine. I'm sure every person that has been elected to the position of city clerk has tried to do the very best job they can. Unfortunately, the best they can does not serve the public as it could with a qualified staff. The public's best served when standards of proficiency are required. The last assistant city clerk hired by the council met requirement, qualifications, standards, and was tested for the position. I've attached a copy of those qualifications and duties. I've also attached a letter that appeared in the News Times from Mary Rickard, who served as assistant city clerk for 31 years. She pointed out that in the past, the office was held by a cigar maker, a retired hatter, a hairdresser, an auto mechanic, a realtor, all of whom had no knowledge of the office and the work that goes on in that office. They were never expected to carry out the work of that office. For that reason, she feels, as I feel, the position is not needed and should be abolished and replaced with a full-time staff person. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Any questions from anybody? Thank you, Warren. Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to address the commission? Luciano?
My name is Gregory Marciano. I live at 179 Long Ridge Road. May I revisit the cap on the bonds that do not revisit that?
Certainly.
Okay. I think there should be $1 cap put on the bonds every year. And I also think that these bonds should have also a 5 and 10-year cap, so that we can't go every year, say, if you put a $2 million cap, we can't just spend $2 million every year. Because we can have, by the end of 10 years, we could have $20 million of bonds that have not been voted on by the residents. I think it should be, included in the charter revision. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Okay. Would anyone else like to address this?
Margaret Mitchell, I'm a property owner, and I was very interested in the information that Mr. Levy brought in from the League of Municipalities about capital programming. And I would like to see Danbury do something differently. You probably can't do what we do in Colorado. We have a finance committee that meets with the department heads and meets with the mayor's office and comes to a consensus on the ranking of the projects. And that committee takes out anything that might be construed as an operating cost, make sure that gets in the budgeting, not in the bonding and not in the capital plan. You've got to do it the style that this government requires, but I'd really like to see you deal with this. We didn't used to need as many projects to be done, but we've expanded services and expanded population, and our way of doing things is simply out of date, and we simply need to move forward. And I really hope that you will do something different with the capital program in conjunction with the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Lisa Marcia, 179 Orange Park, Danbury. I'd like to address two things. One is the office of the city clerk. I think it's time that we got that office into the 21st century. I think the way of doing her job is a little bit outdated and should be more specific with maybe a job description or something, so that anyone who comes into that job has some sort of idea of what they're supposed to be doing. If you run a business, you have to have job descriptions in order to get everybody on board and what their duties are, and I think it's only necessary. The city government should have that same process. The other thing I'd like to say is that I would definitely ask that you cap the amount of spending on issues, because that, as my husband said, it can lead to tremendous amount of money in the long term. And it should be some kind of limit. Otherwise, we'll get into a lot of trouble. Thank you. Thank you for your service on this.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know you.
You're the one in town that doesn't.
I'm Lynn Mauer, 83 Highland Avenue in Danbury. After hearing the testimony of Attorney Jaber, I believe even more strongly that planning and zoning should not be joined together. He stated it would not help developers nor their lawyers, and they would put too much power in the hands of too few people. Each change that either commission makes affects the quality of life of our city and our neighborhoods. The public should be encouraged to address the commissions individually, and I fear if you put them together, there will not be enough notices or enough time for the public to realize something is coming up to be talked about. I was encouraged by the treasurer's comments to you all. I had no idea of all the things his job entails. I like having another set of eyes watching out for taxpayers' monies. Please keep that job in the charter. I was amazed by the testimony of the city clerk and dismayed when she suggested that it was too costly to inform the public by publishing the ordinances or notices in the public of public hearings. Sometimes democracy just costs money. Her suggestions that no one reads the notices is dead wrong. I read them. I even cut them out to remind me where I need to be at individual meetings. I also believe our charter requires them to be published, and I believe it is required by the state statutes. I hope you don't find a way around this law. As she was suggesting, there's ways to do it. I believe the city would be better served with a qualified, secretarial qualified civil servant, serving the common council and chosen by the common council. I think this person could do the 3 jobs set forth in the charter for the city clerk. If you still think we need a city clerk, fine, but the council should choose someone to work directly with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
Al Wilson, 182 Alzheimer Street. I just want to bring up something that the city clerk stated about publication of public notices or this paper. I did a little bit of research because I was looking at the state capitol, and I looked at the Danbury's charter, section 310 about the publication of notices, and I called up the state and see if there was a state statute pertaining to that. There's several of them. I mean, there's section 7-157, it's the Connecticut State Statute of Municipal Powers. It's also section 7-191, which definitely pertains to like cities publish notices in a newspaper that has the greatest percentage of circulation based upon how many people you have in the area, which is why basically you can't do a public notice in, let's say, the Tribune or in a small newspaper. You have to do in a newspaper that has a comparable amount of subscriptions based upon, the biggest newspaper in the area, in other words. And I also did a little more research, and I found that in Ridgefield, section 36 pertains to the publication of notices. Brookfield, section 4-5 of their charter. Newtown, section 7-50. This is all because of the state statute. So basically, you're bound to a certain extent by state statute to publish these things. And I am one person that reads this stuff because thank goodness we have the state statute that have to publish this stuff, or else sometimes you won't even know what's going on unless you see these legal notices. So I just want to bring that to your attention, and I'll talk about other things that were brought up by the city clerk at the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else like to address the commission? Seeing none, we will move on then. And the second subject on our agenda after the public comments, we were going to have a discussion of the office of treasurer.
That's correct.
Thank you, Peter. Would you like to, anyone have questions or comments? We had heard from Dan Jowdy, and the question before us, I think, is whether or not we want to keep that position in the charter. Does anyone have any comments regarding that?
Well, it's a part-time elected office. And after listening to Mr. Jowdy and familiarize yourself with it, some of it seems redundant in that most of the duties seem to be performed by the finance department in and of itself. And when somebody goes in to review invoices very quickly and sign or oversee the signing of checks, I don't know how much oversight you actually get with that in terms of correcting expenses. There's an awful lot of oversight in city expenditures as it is right now. And most of it's all
Anybody else have any reaction to what we had heard? Diane?
I felt very, very comfortable that someone was looking at the expenses and even catching some things that might have slipped, past other people. So I feel that it's a very needed function, and I think he does a good job.
Okay. One of the things I want to be very cognizant of is, as we discuss these positions, we're really talking about the charter position. Because in this and in the city clerk position that we're going to be discussing, the people in them are great people who are doing very good jobs, this isn't a judgment of the person in the office. This is a judgment of should this office be in the charter so that that position has to be filled. And I do want to make that clear. So as we talk about this, there are people in there, we need to be aware of the feelings that we tend to generate with this. But we still have to make that decision, is should this office stay in the charter? And that's really where we are. So as it comes to the treasurer's office, are we ready to move ahead and make a decision on that? Do you want more time to think about it? Are there other comments or questions that people have, or other people you'd like to hear from?
No, I think we need to also think about the office of treasurer and perhaps be a little more specific as in the charter about exactly what the duties are for the office. I know the director of finance, when he spoke to us, said he liked having that other person looking things over. So, you know, taking his word on that and looking at the office and looking at what we have here in the charter, I'd like to just get it a little more specific.
Okay, so how would you like to learn more information about that? Do we want to hear from other people?
I don't know as, you know, we really need to hear from other people. I think we probably should have asked Danny, you know, how many hours do you work on this? You know, what exactly is the time frame for what you're doing? And then be more specific in the charter.
Mm-hmm.
I recall that he did discuss the amount of time he puts in. Some, depending upon the workload, sometimes he'll work really late, and other times it's just a couple hours. So it really is a part-time position.
Mm-hmm. But what's part-time?
One of the issues with an elective office in the charter is that it can be very part-time. It's really kind of self-fulfilling. You decide how much time and effort you're going to do. I don't think there's any question that Mr. Johnny does a great deal of work.
Yes,
He's
he
made the
does.
comments that they'll call him up and say, bring your sleeping bag, because he's got a lot of checks to sign and a lot of oversight to do. The question is, I think, does the finance department have enough oversight so that they can handle this without the second pair of eyes being an elective office, which is the treasurer? Mary?
I didn't hear anybody come to us and say that that position was a detriment, and that person in that job was holding up the signing checks, and we weren't late paying bills because we couldn't get there. I didn't hear anything negative about it. I didn't hear anybody say anything to that effect. And I also, he did make one comment, Mr. Jowdy, he said, maybe I should make a confirmation on this. He said, when an insurance company or bonding company comes in, they like to see somebody there that's an elected person. And they just like that. But short of hearing anybody say anything negative about the job.
Any other questions or comments?
Do we know how much money is allocated to that
The Office of Treasurer?
Yeah, the Office of Treasurer.
It's about $17,000, not counting benefits. Benefits were on there. I think Danny may be up to 20 at this point. Roughly, maybe 17,000.
Decisions? We can leave it as it is and move on to the next section. As you know me, we'll revisit all this stuff over and over again till we're comfortable. Would you like to take a vote on it now, or do you want to wait for another meeting?
Well, we've only got 9 meetings left, and I'd like to vote on it and get it out of the way so we can move on to the other.
I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to retain the position as described in the charter.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded to retain the treasurer's position as described in the charter. I need more discussion.
No, I think, I really wonder, when the treasurer talked about, for example, a bill that comes up, an expense up, travel, and it goes to the department head who reviews it after being drafted, and then it goes to the finance department who reviews it, and it gets reviewed again by him. It just seems like maybe it's time with the sophistication of the finance department, the oversight by the finance department, that there really isn't a need for this one more set of eyes. I'm not sure I understand what he brings to the public, because of course, I mean, we're all taxpayers and we all want someone to watch, but how many people can we pay to watch the expenditure? We have a whole department dedicated to this. To have an and that being an elected position, it kind of goes by the wayside that, I think we've outgrown it. I don't think it's necessary anymore.
See, to me, it brings checks and balances because the other people actually are employees of the city, and he answers to the electors. He's an elected official, so he.
But what's he going to bring to that decision-making process that someone from the finance department's not? Someone from the west side of Danbury, or the east side of Danbury, what more can... My point is, I think the running of the city at some point has to be left to the people that know best. And I'm not saying that the treasurer wouldn't know best for any given treasurer, but we have a whole department that is reviewing these things, these expenses, and to the extent that the department head reviews them, and then it goes to a finance, it's assigned to a finance person who is looking at it. What more could be looked at? How much more is there to look at? And so it just seems like it's, in my years of living in this town, I have gradually seen that position become more and more political and less, more form than substance. And again, I'm definitely afraid of allowing this powers to be centered and things like that. So I worry about the public and protecting the public, but in this case, how many times can you look at it? Upside down, sideways, left and right. I think that money could be much better spent, those taxes, somewhere else.
Any other comments?
If that's a position that we choose not to recommend to keep in the charter, we could always phase it out over time to allow the present person serving there, enough time, and not necessarily have it expire. But I see it as a position that is not that powerful in the charter itself, and if anything, we haven't had that experience. It could be a big encumbrance to the effective running of the municipality if you get the wrong person in office for a while. So we don't have that now. I don't think we necessarily have that, but it's entirely possible that it could occur. And I don't think the benefits of retaining the position are worth the risk going forward.
Okay. I will try your minds if there's no more comments. The motion, Peter, would you read the motion?
I didn't write it down.
Was it simply
retain the position.
To retain the position as it's written in the charter?
That's correct.
So if you vote aye, if you vote yes, it is to retain the position.
Yes.
All in favor of retaining the treasurer's position, raise your hand. All opposed? The motion passes 4 in favor, 2 opposed. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the Office of City Clerk. This is a multifaceted thing. We've been asked at least to change the name. But we've heard from several people over weeks and weeks that this is a position that creates confusion, but one, because of the name, and two, it is a political position. We've been offered many different ideas as to how it should be structured, either through the council or under the mayor's office. I will entertain discussions and/or motions at this time.
I would like to speak to some common council members, maybe Joe Cotto, about what his thoughts are on the city clerk, and I just think we don't have enough information to really make a decision at this point.
Okay. What other information?
I'd like to see how he feels that the office interacts with the council and what his thoughts are on whether they need a separate staff or whether he feels it should be appointed or remain elected. And just all those issues that are unresolved at this point.
Anybody else?
I think,
Question?
yeah, I think we're ready to make a decision on this. I do. We've heard a lot from many different people about this position. And again, this is a position where in the past, I think the city has been fairly well served, but it's a position that is a carry-on from another era and doesn't really reflect the realities of, in my opinion, what goes on in government anymore, having an elected person do this job. And an independent elected person. The same provision that we're talking about, section 3-3 of the charter, allows the council itself to hire its own staff. All it would take would be a majority of the council to hire its own staff or get its own clerk. So I think the council itself, the legislative branch, would probably go out if they decided to and needed somebody to get somebody to be their staff member. They should have one. They're all volunteers. There's 21 of them. They have huge agendas. They have many different topics. They should have a full-time employee, as they're clearinghouse of information and setting up agendas. The city clerk has an office as it's described in the present charter. I think is an anachronism, and I think I'm in favor of voting to remove it, maybe by a date in the future, and it no longer be an office in the city government.
Peter, what would you replace it with? Would you put language in there for the?
I would take out all the language. I'd leave section 3-3, the council may at any time appoint or hire a clerk or a secretary who shall perform the duties of, and I'd list the duties of the city clerk, maintaining an office to keep copies of every proposed ordinance, a record of the proceedings and the votes. I'd put that under a 3-3 where the council may choose somebody that they hire who's accountable to the council.
Does everyone see where that is on page 7? It is the bottom third of the description of the city clerk. Any other comments about that from anybody? Peter, you said you would do that perhaps sometime in the future.
I would say that the office will no longer be an office of the city government, and I would pick a year. I don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of the election cycle right now.
Mr. Chairman, and ex officio member, so I'm not crashing the party, but you might, if you were to go with that, would be the election of 2011. Because the reason being is that the 2009, this gets ratified or not ratified. If it doesn't get ratified by the community, then it is no charter petition. If it does, then it would send such a position in the subsequent election. If you were to do it that way, then I'm sure everybody has their own thoughts about the issue.
I mean, that would be my inclination, is to do something like that.
You've got good experience. You should be on this commission.
Headaches down the hall.
How about that, everybody? Any other any comments about that?
Just so it would get, by your language, it would just get phased out, and then it would just be replaced, Peter, and then there would be a job posting?
Well,
How would the
no,
transition?
the section 3-3 would eventually be updated. There'd be language about a city clerk, and it would say the city clerk's office would be no longer functioning after,
There are job descriptions for both positions, just so you're aware.
and it would just end at a certain date, and then we describe in better form, perhaps, we'd add language in to describe a position that the legislative branch can create. They would have the power to hire somebody. It's a civil service employee, and would have those duties, that person that they hire.
Would you keep the language, the clerk shall be responsible for the publication of such notices of hearing and publication of ordinances as may be necessary? Is that
The
part of it?
person hired by the council would have that responsibility.
So that language, that specific language would
All
say?
that language would say.
But above that, would that language say, the city clerk shall keep for public inspection copies of every proposed ordinance and record of all proceedings?
Yes, all those duties still need to be performed. The public has a right to get those documents.
So we
They
will-
need to be, there needs to be a place for people to go to get that information. An office needs to be maintained
So,
that tells all that.
so if we were gonna go in that direction, could we give this to Mr. Gottschalk to kind of wordsmith that section? Would that make sense?
I would suggest that what you do is to decide on an approach.
And then,
And I'll write some language, and you can take it up at your next meeting and decide to amend it or pass it, as you choose, with respect to the specific language that I offer to you. But right now, concentrate on whether you want to have a city clerk, and if you do, what you want to call it.
you just want to give us handouts.
I live for that.
That's, okay.
Mr. Chairman, good Aaron. I think Diane did make a good point about listening to the council president about the interaction and how they spend the time. Because that information will be vital, and having Rick be able to draft what he needs, if the commission goes that way, what he needs out of that position, what a leader of the council needs to hear feedback from that particular position. So at the very minimum, I think that would be valuable information from the commission and Mr. Chairman.
So before we move ahead with this, you're saying bring in the president of the council for their input, and then we would make the decision on whether to keep this position?
Yeah, perhaps that's a little discussion. I mean, doing my legwork, I'd say, Joe, could you go in there and talk a little bit about what the interface is, give the commission a sense of what the responsibilities and duties are, and how he thinks the system currently works, and then at that point, you'll all be able to make your decisions about which approach to take based on the feedback he's giving you. And I think you'll find, having worked with 3 presidents, pretty much in one sense of at least the commonality of what you need, the information you need to make the decisions that are made on a monthly basis.
How do we feel? So, table this until we can hear from the council president? Okay. Can I
That'll
get
be
a
on
mo-
the next agenda.
Do I need a motion to table it? We can just move on? Okay.
Well, you got a motion. on the
You've got a
floor.
motion on the floor, Diane.
So you can,
I didn't make a motion on this one.
No?
On the
Oh.
treasurer.
There's no motion on
Oh,
it.
you just suggested that
Yeah.
earlier.
There wasn't a motion.
Oh,
So since there was no motion, we will table this?
That's right.
And could we ask the secretary to contact the president of the council and ask if he would come before us at our next meeting? Okay. Next on our agenda, the combination of planning and zoning commission. We've spent a great deal of time on that. Anybody have some questions or comments about combining planning and zoning?
Mr. Chairman, I have some remarks about that. I know I'm here to discuss item 5, but if the commission were to move tonight to take action on it, I know Mr. Levy mentioned he hadn't heard any thoughts that were positive to this issue, and somebody wanted to share some thoughts, at least with the genesis of this came about. The commission doesn't want to go in that direction, that's fine, no problem.
We would love to hear.
Really, basically, the genesis of this idea of combining planning and zoning goes back to our comprehensive plan development, which was adopted in 2002. I'm sure Dennis Elmer has talked about that with you. Every elected body at that time voted on the plan of development, and this recommendation was clearly, including the council. The plan of development was before the council, and they adopted it with this recommendation in it. So, just so you understand, we didn't sort of just pull this from thin air and say, what if, this was something that there had been community consensus on the development of that plan of development. The issue, and what I hear from folks is, well, we don't want things to be easier for the developers. I mean, that's really the concern here, is that we're going to make things too easy, there won't be public comment, there won't be public input. And let me just say to you that what makes things easier or more difficult for developers are regulations. They're not the body that we're from. If you have tough regulations and a combined P and Z, folks will have full vetting, due diligence, if you will, a particular proposed project. They'll have to meet our zoning regulations. They'll have to meet our planning regulations. Ridgefield has a combined P and Z. Now, talk to people about how hard it is to get something through in Ridgefield. It's a nightmare. And it's not a nightmare because of the people serving as P and Z. It's a nightmare because their regulations are so onerous and difficult. And so there's something to be said about looking at your regs, not necessarily focusing on the various boards and commissions. From the city side, in terms of economic development, it makes sense to have one body where people will vet these proposals, assuming they're consistent with our zoning regulations and our planning regulations. And it makes sense to offer a denial faster than what you get now. And I think what's torturous for folks, and you'll hear this from everybody, when they talk about permitting in Danbury, it's not the permit center, what they're really referring to is the land use process. They're not referring to whether or not I can get my permit, they're referring to how long it takes to weave your way through EIC, planning, and then into zoning if you need a zone change. So I think the issue really becomes about how quick we can deny something and save people money on lawyers, engineers, and just nonsense when we know we don't want the project, it's not consistent with our regulations, and it's not going to pass. But also how quickly we can approve something if it is within our regulations, if it does meet the community standard. So I think there's something to be said about that in terms of efficiency. We have a very inefficient system right now, and because of that, we suffer sometimes in being able to attract economic development. People will say, look, I just don't want to go through that. I don't have 8 months to wait while I can go to another community and get this project in 3 months, assuming that it meets the community standard and folks want it, things like that. So really it comes down to regulations, and I think that's important when we know that we have to have regulations that meet the community standard. If folks want less development, have tougher regulations. Understand that there's a trade-off there. Less development means less tax revenue. Less tax revenue means that folks, we don't generate money for the grant list, it becomes harder to make ends meet. If they want easier regulations, which this community for 30 years was known as in some sense as being a pro-development regulation community. In other words, we said our regs were easy to get through. We invited people in, but once we got them in here, we said, now you got to go to planning, now you go to zoning, and let's throw EIC on top of that. So then that's a decision, a community decision that we make. But I think that we shouldn't dismiss and suggest that a combined P&Z would be easier to get your project. In fact, in many cases, if your regulations are strong and stout, it'll be more difficult. The other issue is that should it be appointed or elected? I believe it should be elected. There's no better way to hold people accountable than to say, you can make that decision, just understand you're going to be running for re-election on the P&Z Commission, and if you don't, you're going to be held accountable. And I hear voters tell that to zoning commission members all the time. Planning commissions appointed by the mayor's office and adopted by, ratified by the council. So they're not really sort of, answerable in some ways to the electorate unless it's through the mayor, and it's very convoluted, and people can't figure out where the responsibility lies. But people are really happy with development, and you have a combined P&Z, they can point right to the planning and zoning board and say, you guys didn't do your job. If they're happy with development, they can re-elect them time and time again. And I guess another food for thought, other CEOs that I've talked to that have combined P&Zs that are elected, is they're concerned to me when they say to me, the con side is that, well, this, because these folks are elected, they don't respond to anybody. They won't listen to me. I'm the mayor of this big city, and they're just off doing their own thing. And oftentimes, their community standard is different than what the agenda of the city's, not the city of Danbury, but the city's administration might be. So that's some of the con that I've heard from talking to people that are out there. I think in some ways there's some value and benefit to it. In other ways, I also understand what the residents are saying. Hey, we want more input, we want more feedback, we want more participation, we want more oversight. And that's certainly something to be said. A lot of that is driven by our regulations. We have easy regulations. We still have these projects coming before the boards and commissions that aren't consistent with the community standard, but because our zoning regulations are designed in such a way, people can at least apply and try to get the project approved. We have done a good job over the last 5 years of tightening up our zoning and planning regulations. They're vastly different than they were probably 4 or 5 years ago. But there's still, every once in a while, we'll find an area where we have inconsistent zones matched up to each other and a whole bunch of other technical stuff. But I think there's some positives to it. I think it merits consideration. But again, I understand how folks feel if they want more oversight and they feel like the two boards would give them that. And that's okay too. I mean, we certainly can survive the current system in place. So just want to throw out some thought to it. But this was something that was adopted by really every board and commission in the city of Danbury and the county council.
Okay, everybody, comments?
I have a different insight into this only because I probably am an attorney and I have that experience. I've never been an active land use attorney, but I do know this, that when you want to put a project in and it doesn't fit in a particular zone, you go to the zoning commission and you change the zoning regulations. That's not really oversight, that's just another way to get around what the plan of development is. And I think what Mr. Elpern was trying to say, although I think most of us lost it, was by having a combined plan Planning and Zoning Commission. You shouldn't have that zoning commission aspect going off and doing a thing that's different than the plan of development. Lawyers love when they can go to different forums and get different results. Mr. Jaber is a very competent lawyer, a very skilled lawyer, and he brought out some points as to why we wouldn't necessarily want to combine them. One good point that I think a lot of people who attended our meetings have picked up on in their public comments. But the underlying point is, by having a separate zoning commission, and this has been proven in several controversial projects in Danbury, a developer can go to the zoning commission, change the zone, and thereby allow the project that's contrary to the plan of development in the city of Danbury. I think one of the impetuses behind this idea of combining the planning and zoning commissions is to force the same people who are to uphold the plan of development in the city of Danbury to make that hard decision. It's kind of hard to uphold the plan if that's what you're charged with, and then change the zone that's going to defeat that. It's less hard to do that if you're in a separate body, such as the zoning commission. I'm in favor of it, only because I think it adds a little more consistency for the very reason I extrapolate. Lawyers generally like to have different places to go, and I think by having one place, so long as there are the same number of public hearings for each project, I don't think it's going to hurt the city of Danbury. I think what we've had now doesn't work. We just need to drive around on a few select roads. We've had this for a long time. To say that the status quo is working, I don't necessarily think so. We're losing our industrial land, our industrially zoned land. At some point, that's going to be important. I don't know when. And that's being done by the zoning commission, by their selectively changing zones on different parcels of property. They might have good reason to do it, but maybe perhaps the better way would be to change the whole plan of development for the city and go about it in a more systematic way. So I'm in favor of combining the planning and zoning commissions for that matter. I think it's a little bit of a radical idea. Change is a hard thing to accept, but that's my reason for it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might just interject.
Yes.
I think Mr. Kazay makes a really salient point, and that is that we often are criticizing Danbury for not managing our planning and zoning. We've had this system in place for 30-plus years. We've had projects that are inconsistent in neighborhoods, inconsistent in community standard. And the fact of the matter is, many good attorneys will try to provide the planning commission against the zoning commission, and I think some people serve on those, but the zoning commission against the planning commission in an effort to wiggle in through our regs. And that's why our regs are critical, and having one voice and oversight of these projects is critical. I also, just as an aside, think Mr. Jaber is a wonderful land use attorney, he's one of the best in the state, but I've never heard so many people agree with him as I have lately. Yet, he's the same person that would be out in front of the zoning commission trying to get his project approved. I mean, you're asking a land use attorney to look for the easiest path of least resistance, and he's going to say those things. But I think at the end of the day, you have to look at what's best for the community. Somebody who lives in the community versus necessarily lives in a industrial area.
Anybody else? Any comments? Paul, everyone's happy? Well, as chairman, I'll lay down my gavel for a second just to say that this was one of the toughest things I thought we had to deal with. And I just couldn't ever get a feel for why combining them would work. As a matter of fact, as I thought about combining them, I was thinking, gee, we ought to combine them and then have some appointed and some elected. And yet, that's the system that we have now with separate boards. And in all of our conversations with the planning director, it just seemed like there was a communications problem between planning and the zoning people, and it just seems like we needed to fix that piece of it. So I just never personally was given enough reason to make the change to this. My biggest fear is that if it's totally elected, I know I've been asked 100 times to be on the zoning commission because it's way down at the end of the ballot, and no one knows who you are anyway, and I just think those people tend to get lost in the shuffle. So were it up to me, I would vote against this personally. So, anybody else have any other comments?
Yes, one other comment. I would like to see them combined. I think we have, as the mayor said, we have too many instances, too many places around town where people have gone to the zoning commission, given them a hard luck story, and they've gone ahead and changed the zoning. It happened with Elmer's Diner, with Ann's Place. Zoning commission allowed that because Ann's Place was going to build there. Well, Ann's Place got the other donation of land, they sold that property, and somebody had the zoning changed, and they built that diner with no parking available. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My husband was on the zoning commission when it happened. They said, we never approved it for that. However, this is what happens. And I think with a combined commission, with planning and zoning working together, we may be able to eliminate some of that problem.
I said, what, this report from 2004 where it talked about the recommendation. There are other recommendations here to make the process more efficient, and one of them was to give training to the zoning commissioners. And I think that having separate commissions, but having them qualified and trained, go a long way to prevent some of these problems that we have.
We do that, Diane. We've trained both planning and zoning. We give generalized training about Robert's rules and about procedures in running a meeting, but we also give duty-specific training about our zoning regulations. We've also given planning commission and all land use commissions an update on the plan of development. We try to do that roughly every 18 months or so because those positions roll over. We put new appointees on there, so we have it again. Last one we did was about the middle of last year. So we do make that a habit to do training with them. The problem is that by having two separate commissions, you end up having a double the size of people, and what happens is I think Joan has articulated the points. People go to the zoning commission with a hard look tail about you can't use the property, this is terrible. And the zoning commission, with planning commission, sometimes a denial from them because it's not consistent with the plan development. We'll go ahead and change the zone anyways. And then we end up having our development applications that are inconsistent with what our comprehensive plan development is. We spend a lot of money on that plan development, and we're in the process of updating our new one 4 years early. Effective every 10 years by law, we're doing ours in the 6th year. But we'll spend almost $100,000 in putting that plan together. The expectation is that at least, it'll be followed. The planning commission does a pretty good job at that. The zoning commission tends to be a little bit more arbitrary. The zoning board of appeals tends to be where they're really supposed to listen to hardships. Oftentimes, it's them making zoning decisions. It really isn't their own function, which is another issue. So we do work on that all the time.
Any other comments, questions?
I like the way the mayor mentioned that we would get a benefit from toughening up the regulations. I think that would be advantageous. And I'd like to support the idea of keeping them separate. So keeping them separate and strengthening regs. That's the both words.
We'll put some zoning regs in the new charter. How's that sound?
Well, we've done that. We continue to do that.
Okay. Do we want to make a motion at this point?
Sure, I'll make a motion. I'll move that the language in the charter be changed to allow a combination of planning and zoning commissions. So there's one P&C commission performing both functions.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded that we combine the planning and zoning commission, and the language will be developed, so whether it's appointed and elected, that will all come out. The first question is, are we going to combine them? So if you vote in favor, you are voting to combine the planning and zoning commission. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Comstock, Uzay, and Mead. Opposed? With a tie vote, I think I vote, and I will vote opposed. So the motion fails. Okay. Number 5, the length of term of offices for all city officials and representatives. Mark, you said you were here for that?
At your invitation.
Please.
Give the message. I actually have, with the indulgence of the commission, 2 issues. One is to talk about length of term of office. I'm going to pull the chair over here. if it's okay.
Absolutely.
And then the second is the issue of bonding, and I've got a proposal I'd like to submit for the record. You can consider it further on down the line. I know you've voted already once on this, and I hate to reopen something that we put to bed, Peter, because they don't have.
We think we voted, we voted 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah, Mary, I'm just trying to, get people comfortable with a situation that sometimes can be uncomfortable. The first issue I just want to mention generally to you is the issue of the 4-year term. I support a 4-year term for all elected offices in the city of Danbury. I can tell you that when I'm out campaigning every 2 years, aside from the fact I knock on somebody's door and they go, "Oh, not you again." The second thing they say is, "Didn't we just get you reelected 18 months ago?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's a 2-year term." And everybody, and I think if you poll this kind of issue, you'd see support range of 75 to 80% people want a 4-year term. For a variety of reasons. I'm going to share those with you. First one is, from the political standpoint, the cost of running campaigns continues to escalate. The most expensive mayoral race in history was the 2001 race between myself and Chris Sotero. Chris is a good friend of mine, a good man, and the city would have been in good hands if he had won as well, so I have nothing but good things to say about him and the way he ran his campaign. But we both spent a boatload of money, okay? Probably he raised a little bit more than I did. He was upwards of about $180,000, and we probably spent about $130,000. So we spent almost $320,000 on a 2-year mayoral race, which was one of the closest, if not the closest, in the history of the city. So from a cost standpoint, it gets very difficult to fund and finance campaigns, and to continually be fundraising becomes a burden on anybody that's in office, from mayor all the way down to constable. It's just a lot of work to be able to do that. Secondly, I also believe that Jack Welch, who used to be the chairman of GE and CEO of GE, used to say that you can manage for the short term and you can manage for the long term, but a good manager can manage for both the short term and the long term. A 2-year term encourages mayors to manage only for the short term, and it's unfortunate. I'm not suggesting I've never done that, and I'm not saying any dispersions on any other mayor, but the reality is that when faced with re-election, as soon as you get elected, you're continually running for re-election, and that again goes all the way down to the constables. So the decision-making process that you take, there's too much oftentimes a temptation to only make a decision based on the short-term implications of that decision, where realistically you need to make a long-term decision, which may be short-term very unpopular, but long-term people may come back and say, you were right about that issue. Well, in a 2-year term, you may be out of the job before people come to that realization that you were right on a particular issue. And so I think, and I believe that's why a 4-year term makes more sense. It gives you the opportunity to manage for the short term, but also manage for the long term. Some examples I can give you. The Housing Authority, my first year in office, had some trouble, some challenges. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but it was an issue. I decided to replace the entire Housing Authority board. That was, which is in my purview under the statute here. It was not really involved in this, but we sort of knew about it. And it was highly controversial. People were upset. They felt that I was, trying to force them out and trying to remake the Housing Authority. When the reality was I had a responsibility to the tenants of that organization to make sure they had a roof over their heads. Tough short-term decision to make. A lot of upheaval in the community. A lot of upset. Probably the most controversial things I've done. Long-term, people have come back now, even people that are no longer on the commission or no longer employees in the Housing Authority, and say, you were right about that issue. We needed that. It was a problem, and I'm glad we did it. So that's a decision that you may not want to make if you got a re-election a couple months coming up. You're saying, look, I just don't want to deal with the aggravation much. Get re-elected. So in terms of managing for the short term and managing for the long term, 4-year term makes, I think, all the sense in the world. Thirdly, just about most of the surrounding communities are moving to a 4-year term. Ridgefield just implemented one. Roxbury, of all places, has a 4-year term. Torrington goes to a 4-year term after this coming up fall election. Waterbury, I believe, is working on a 4-year term. Stanford has a 4-year term, but they just implemented one. So big and small communities all across the spectrum, for the reasons that we've articulated, are moving towards a 4-year term. I do recognize that the city's had a history of having 2-year terms. They've been fun. Based on whatever my career goals are, just want to be clear that this really doesn't impact me. It's not about me, it's about, as Carlos said, it's about the office, and about what's right for the community. And so, if this were adopted in 2009, the first four-year term would be the 2011 elections. You never say never, but certainly I think long-term, look at the city, that would be the right move for us to make. I don't think we should stagger positions. I think that gets redundant. It gets silly. We go right back to the pressures put on us about fundraising and about organization. I think everybody should be at the same term level. I think it's important that everybody runs a team. I'd also be concerned about voter turnout, participation, cost of running an election every 2 years is expensive. I know the primary we're having next month is costing us close to $20,000 in the city, and so if there's a way, even by going to a four-year term, we can save $35,000 or $40,000 for a general election. That's always helpful. And I think it's important that everybody runs as a team. I've been blessed to work with great people on the constitutional officers. As treasurer, I've worked with Democrats and Republicans. Town clerk, I've worked with Democrats and Republicans. And city clerk, I've worked with both as well. All the people that have served in those positions have really worked hard and done a nice job. So we always seem to work it out after election day to figure it out and make sure that we get the job done for the community. So for those reasons, that's why I support a four-year term. And Mr. Chairman, I don't want to stop for any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That was excellent. Questions, comments?
I have a few. A four-year term concerns me in particular over a number of things.
We've had this conversation before.
We have had this conversation before. I'm not really, I'm worried about it on any number of levels. I mean, and this doesn't involve anything about you.
Yeah, sure.
But in the future, I mean, should Danbury have a mayor who gets in trouble, legal trouble? We don't have a recall provision, and I don't believe we're allowed to have one in our charter, a recall. And we could be saddled with a mayor who's under investigation, or even worse, under indictment, as has happened in several Connecticut municipalities. And I go back to a time that I remember, and rightly or wrongly, in our own town, Jimmy Dyer was under investigation and was indicted. Before he was indicted, he was quickly elected out of office, in a very short time, and his case went on, and eventually he went to trial, but it was a long time after, and Danbury moved on. And while that might have been unfair to him, it wasn't unfair to the city of Danbury. We moved ahead. We weren't burdened by an elected officer who was under indictment or under investigation. And that's a strong point with me. I think that's a benefit to a two-year term. I also think that our whole process of government is geared to a two-year term in Danbury. The mayor we have a very strong and effective mayor. We have had for a number of years now, for decades, and a council. And you don't really see a lot of budget fights where people are allowed to go out and get a referendum on the annual budget. They're not going to be able to mobilize. And that doesn't concern me so much as long as the people who vote on the budget are accountable on a regular basis. And they're accountable at the election booth every 2 years. And I think that sort of makes it work. So I think that when you say that, when you say about the effectiveness of a four-year term, Mr. Mayor, would you think a recall provision would be more appropriate?
Notwithstanding that state statutes don't let us do a recall, I think, let me just take a step back. I think as an elected official for the life of me, I couldn't imagine, and it does happen though, which is startling, if somebody who's indicted, would continue to be in office, that you would think that their number one priority in life would be to clear their name. And in Mr. Dyer's case, he was, and I don't know the details of the case, but he was acquitted, at least on charges. So he lost his career over that. But I recognize what you're saying, that it happens. I think of Mayor Giordano and Waterbury, where this Waterbury government had to negotiate a deal to get him out of office. Mayor Ganem in Bridgeport, who stayed in office after his indictment as well. And I think that's unfortunate, and I don't know if there's a way around that, except to say that you're accountable every day to the voters, whether you're up for re-election or not. I mean, people are in my office from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. every night, and whether it's taxes or whether it's bonding or whether it's the crosswalk, they're there to tell you how they feel and what they want done. So in this sense, I feel accountable every day. I don't feel only accountable in election time. Could we be blessed with a bad, or blessed, could we be saddled with a bad mayor who doesn't feel accountable? Absolutely. And I think at that point, when the time came right, we would vote him out or her out of office. You could even make an argument that under indictment, you still have the presumption of innocence. I don't know how you could continue to serve. I mean, I just don't know how you could do that. I would think, you'd be so obsessed about clearing your name that you couldn't function on the charter and things like that. But yet, there are people who do it, and unfortunately, they've been found guilty, and it's been a detriment to the community. But so I think a recall provision has some merit for those reasons. At first I said to Rick, when we discussed this, not knowing what the statute was, said to Rick, well, why don't we just put some language in that says, if you're indicted or for high crimes and misdemeanors, similar to what the Constitution says, you've got to resign your office. But then that discounts the presumption of innocence, and the statute doesn't allow us to do that. It doesn't work for us. If the commission wanted to, you certainly could write to the legislature and say, look, you ought to think about at least putting enabling legislation saying, if you want to have a recall provision, you can, and see if they can do something this session with that. But I just think it's a double-edged sword both ways. The other problem I have with the recall provision is that I'm afraid people will use it for political purposes. If that standard is not high, you could have people running around with petitions because they didn't like who your appointment was to the Charter Revision Commission, or they didn't like the street light put over on Main Street. It should have been on South Street. And there's a danger there where that gets to be highly politicized, and every decision made becomes a subject to recall. So that standard has to be really high in your document as to what would meet that standard for a recall, even the amount of signatures collected, or tie that also to the situation that if you can do that, But there's some merit to it. I'm not going to dismiss a recall. There's other cities and towns across the country where it works. Interesting thought.
Other comments? I'll lay down my chairman's gavel then.
Okay.
Again, I would like to see us. You want a question?
Yeah, I have another question.
Oh, Peter, please.
Mr. Mayor, with a 4-year term, and I know your point is well taken, and people know where your office is and come and complain. But
In this city, which is a good thing.
But when you go to a 4-year term, I mean, we have I think, in the present charter and the present practice in Danbury, there's sort of been a fine balance in terms of passing the budget, and the voters always know, okay, our taxes are way up, we can go get these guys, in the next election, which is right around the bend. Once you go to a 4-year term, that doesn't necessarily happen anymore. I mean, someone might be inclined to adjust other parts of the charter to make it easier to go to referendum, and that would be a little more difficult to run a city like Danbury, the way they run Bethel or Brookfield or something.
Yeah, I don't think we should look at those as a model.
No.
Look, we have a representative democracy, and the answer's up through the council. People should call the council. People share that, and Democrats and Republicans, they come to me with whether it's a pothole in the street or whether it's an issue related to the budget. And I have to say that this council, as all previous councils, really work together as a team. We don't always agree on everything, and that's okay. But generally, we try to get the job done because it's the city, as you talked about first. The problem, I think, that always, again, worrying on the budget is that because of the 2-year term, you could, for example, somebody's mentioned our fund balance, which is right now sits at about $19–20 million. I could go in there and say, okay, council, let's take the whole fund balance, spend it this year, pull down taxes artificially low, because I've got a re-elect coming up in about a year, and we want to get re-elected, don't we? And the public's going to love it, and they're going to return everybody to office, and then we're going to come back and hammer you with a 50% tax increase, or we're going to have, God forbid, a catastrophe, we have no money to pay for it. So there's too much of that sometimes. You have to be careful about that, and that's why I say making those long-term decisions that are short-term unpopular, tend to really be where we ought to be pushing the government. I mean, if you looked at Rudy Giuliani's tenure down in New York City, after the first year, they were ready to kill him. And after the second year, they're ready to kill him. By the third year, like, it was a pretty smart decision. And by year 4, the guy won re-election pretty easily because he made those tough long-term decisions early and got them over with. Budgeting's the same way. I mean, the system now kind of encourages that you try to look for alternate revenue streams, even one-shot sources of revenue, and don't budget long-term, and you pay the piper, not necessarily this year or next year, but you're going to pay.
So
I've seen that happen.
So you're saying, I mean, I think what you're saying is something like the capital budget is affected by a shorter term. I mean, there's less planning for those type of expenses.
There's no question that the city not funding its capital budget, not just in several years, but over a 30-year period, and this goes back to administration after administration, you pay the price. There's a reason why we're replacing 8 bridges right now, because they never were replaced before. Well, every one of those bridges is about $2 million. It's $1.5 million for those little bridges to be replaced. There's a reason why we're building a new police station, when 30 years ago we were told we needed, or 20 years ago we needed a police station. Those chickens always come home to roost. And, it's always sometimes more difficult to pay now, but it's always more expensive to pay later. No question about it.
And I don't mean to keep asking all these questions, but I have, the next aspect of this is it seems to me that it's increasingly hard to find people who are willing to serve, for any office, even appointed positions, let alone elected. Do you think it's going to be easier to find more people to serve a 4-year term or a 2-year term? And I mean, for all the elected offices.
I think recruiting will be a lot easier, both for paid offices and volunteers with a 4-year term. I think there is, I do hear from people, well, I got to run again in 18 months, this is a lot of work, and it should be work. I mean, look, you're asking to serve the community. You should go out there and make your case as to why you should be able to do that. But it also can get to the point where it becomes so onerous that, other things suffer. And I think even recruiting for the top level positions, when people face the prospect of a 4-year term for mayor, for example, I think they'll be more apt to run than they would at a 2-year term. It's very difficult to go and make the argument to somebody, hey, we want you to come out of private industry, you're going to do a great job, we're excited to have you run for mayor, we all want to support you. Oh, and by the way, 18 months from now, you got to do it all over again. And somebody's going to, and really a very competitive city. We're blessed with competitive races, and most people are going to say, I'll pass on that. When you add all the headaches that go with that and the salary level, I can make more in the private sector, why bother? But I think with a 4-year term, some level of job security, people would be more apt to run.
And you believe that would be true for all offices? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm more interested right now in the council, finding super council.
I think so. I mean, we do have turnover from time to time in the council on both sides of the aisle. But again, both parties do a nice job at going out and recruiting people to serve on it. In the last several years, we've had nobody that's not shown up to meetings. Everybody's really into it and they're involved. A lot of folks have business backgrounds, and so they apply that skill set to their council work. Other folks have more activism background, they apply that skill set. And we're blessed with good council people that really care about the city, and I think it only makes it easier with a 4-year term. I really do.
No more questions, Peter? Thank you. Other people, questions or comments? And I will again lay down my gavel and I would like to speak in support of this. Lori Kabak came here as town clerk and talked about the training and education she had to get in order to do that job. And she said 2 years later she could have been turned out of office, and what a difference having 4 years would make. So there are some professional positions that I think that this would serve. Mark, I understand what you're saying when you're saying that making a tough decision could come home to roost 2 years out. Worse than that would be a mayor who says, geez, I've got to run for office, so I'm not going to make the tough decision. And I think if you have 4-year terms that you can plan longer periods of time. Having been elected, the worst part of serving on an elected board is running for re-election. Serving on the board of education was fine. It was a lot of work, but at least I was just serving. The election was the most difficult piece, and the fundraising for a position like that was also a nuisance. So I would certainly speak in terms, I think we're a large enough city, and 4 years is certainly the norm, and I think it would be in our best interest to put those terms together. It would require wordsmithing, especially on the Board of Ed. If we went with all elective offices, we start this, we get ripped to
I think they're already serving 4-year terms, right?
Aren't there biennial terms in there?
Only if somebody resigns.
Oh, okay, so, okay.
Amendment 4? Amendment 4?
Yeah, they all have 4-year terms, but if somebody resigns because of family considerations, that then becomes a 2-year term, or to the next available election.
Okay. All right, any other questions or comments? I will,
I have a comment, not a question to the mayor. I mean, I think that we are no longer as well served in our community by good, active, involved newspapers or media, and we don't have the same information we did maybe 30 years ago, where the citizens are being, where there's a reporter here regularly. And other than a few people who attend many of the meetings and talk about the meetings, I think that for most of the public, their only chance to have any real input is an election. And that sort of concerns me as a resident of Danbury. And that's not a politician's fault, it's just the times we live in. And that's a reason, in a weird way, another reason why I think the 2-year term is a good thing, because it forces everybody to go back in front of the voters or the electorate, and it gives everybody a chance to pay attention a little bit. So that's just my comment before we vote.
okay. Thank you. Do we want to vote tonight, or do you want to think about this? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll
Joan?
make a motion that we change the term of elected office for all city officials to 4 years.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded that we change the term of office for elected officials in the city of Danbury to 4 years. Any other comments or questions?
I have some.
Paul?
Maybe one of the reasons that we have government is public service. And the people that run our government tend to look at you talk about career moves, when maybe it's time that we get back to allowing a government to run, having the people run the government, get back to public service. And looking at the way it's evolved into careers. It's evolved into people who are looking at politics as their livelihood, as opposed to a citizen, a taxpayer, someone who votes in the city of Danbury, donating their time if they're going to be a volunteer, or taking a paid position, going in, having their say, doing the best they can for the city of Danbury, and not worrying about being reelected, they're worrying about what's best for the city of Danbury, because they're looking at it as public service. Public service as a paid career, and worrying about whether I'm going to have a job in 2 years or a job in 4 years. It seems to me that if we expand from 2 to 4 years, we're going to be empowering, we're going to be enabling these folks who are professional politicians to continue to run our government. And I'm not so sure that's the best way for the city of Danbury. It's public service, and it always has been. One of the things I think that the charter should do is not tie the hands, though, of those we elect. That's why I thought we should leave the bonding the way it is. Let the legislative branch and let the mayor's office decide how and when all that's going to happen. Don't tie their hands. That's not the purpose of the charter. It's to give them the flexibility and the tools they need in order to run this city while they're in office. However, it's really not the charter that empowers them, it's the voters. And it's the voters who they need to go back to those who empower them to say, hey, how am I doing? Is this good enough? Do you want me to for another 2 years? Having it 4 years is not going to allow that type of give and take, that type of dialogue. And having to stretch it out to 4 years, I think you're encouraging career politicians to now make career decisions. The mayor talked about 2-year terms force short-term management. That's a function of the person making the decision. That's not, I understand a 2-year term will, everyone's going to make a decision maybe for the next election. But that's not why the person is there. If they were thinking less about their political career and more about public service, maybe they would make the unpopular decision, like the housing authority. And all mayors have done it. And if Giuliani made the right decision in year one, I understand maybe he would not get elected, but that's not the point. The point is not whether he gets reelected or not. The point is running the city of Danbury. And if we look at this charter as tying their hands, we're not giving them the tools. But at the same point, the empowerment of the elected official comes from the voter. And I don't think it's asking too much for someone to go back to those who are giving the elected officials their power, not a career, but their power to do the public service, to ask them, how am I doing?
Thank you. Anybody else? Then I'll try your minds. A motion's been made and seconded that we change the term of elected offices in the city of Danbury to 4-year terms. All in favor, please raise your hand. Mead and Cervello, all opposed? Comstock, Florian, Guzay, and Swanson. The motion fails. Thank you all very much. I know that was not an easy decision.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing before I leave tonight.
Yes.
There are been some discussion about borrowing and bonding, and I just want to submit for the record, Rick and I have been kind of wordsmithing and working on this a little bit, understanding some of the concerns that have been raised, some that we agree with, and some that, frankly, I don't agree with. Kind of on Mr. Swenson's page as far as some of the stuff goes that, frankly, it is what it is, and folks have an opportunity to vote on it. But basically, what we'd like to submit is a food for thought, and it certainly can be submitted by the commission, changed around if they want. One of them would be that we would recommend that on the $2.5 million, which was inserted in section 710A,
Yes.
that we would add in an annual cap. There would be an annual cap of $2.5 million. Okay. That we would rework the emergency appropriations section 7-5 under the borrowing. And I have copies. We have copies for you on this. And there's some language at the bottom of the section about the absence of sufficient general fund resources to meet appropriation, additional means of financing shall be provided in such manner. Basically suggesting that we should run down our fund balance to zero in the event of emergency before we would go out and borrow. Understanding at the time that this was written, bond agencies and rating agencies really didn't care too much about fund balance. It's a big issue now. In fact, we'll be meeting with bond rating agencies, Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's tomorrow morning, and they want to see a significant amount of fund balance there. They'd actually rather have you borrow than they would borrow your emergency cash. So my recommendation is that we would just delete that section and replace it with the standard 2/3 of the entire membership. And then there's a discussion about what constitutes an emergency. That hasn't changed. We're going to keep that the same, but there's a paragraph in there that we recommend deleting. And then finally, I guess, to give you the big picture, the concern that I had with an annual cap of just $2.5 million is that if we program $2.5 million in our budget process, and then we come across a project that needs to get done later in the year, or that we just don't have enough money to program for, it won't meet the level of an emergency. It's not a crisis at that moment. But from a financial sense and an economic sense, and from an infrastructure sense, we should do it now rather than later. For example, we may defer on a roof to a school. We may not want to redo the roof, which we do all the time. Well, it's not an emergency. The roof's not leaking right now. It could leak. I program all the money. Is that an emergency? Isn't it an emergency? So what we decided to do is create section 7-3E, which says that the capital improvements program, which is written by the mayor and the director of public works along with the director of planning, that we would create a high priority list of projects for the ensuing fiscal year and for the 5 fiscal years thereafter, which have been previously considered and approved by the City Planning Commission by affirmative vote of 2/3. So we need a 2/3 vote out of the Planning Commission of those present and voting. And that the estimated cost of all projects in said list shall not exceed 10% of the total estimated cost of all projects contained within the capital improvement program. This basically, 10% is an arbitrary, you could say 5%, whatever. This is to put some limitations, which is what some of the members of the public had talked about in terms of your ability, but also gives the flexibility to say, this is our 2.5 million, which we can burn very easily just on paving and drainage work alone. All right, I mean, paving at the cost of asphalt right now, you'll burn through that in seconds. But also allow us to do the roof as funds allow us to do the other long-term capital improvement project, not short-term purchases, with the approval of the council and the planning commission. So it puts some checks and balances in there. Doesn't give you an open checkbook either. Caps it at 2.5 million unless you've met this standard for these projects. And in addition to that, we already prioritize our projects in the capital improvement plan. This would require further vetting of those projects to create this narrowly defined list of things that absolutely have to get done within the next, say, 18 months or so. And so that's really where we came up with trying to split the baby here, if you will. The other thing is that, it's easy to take the 10%, add up the prioritized projects that we come up with and say, holy cow, 10% of that is $20 million. We're not suggesting you go bond $20 million without voter authorization. We're suggesting it can be up to 10%. Now, a lot of those decisions are made by the mayor and the director of finance based on what our debt service is, based on what we think we can afford, and based on the absolute crisis part of the project. How bad is it, and how quick do we need it? That would be your not to exceed number. That's not your you have to bond number. You could maybe only do 1% with 2/3 of the council and 2/3 of the planning commission. I think it provides enough checks and balances to alleviate people's fears of the wild mayor running around bonding $50 million in one meeting, which frankly, on a 2-year term, would never happen because we would never get reelected again. And Paul, with all due respect, maybe good public interest to do that, but the reality is that mayors past and future will look at that and say, look, we've got to be reasonable. So that's pretty much what our recommendation is. So just to review real quick, annual cap of $2.5 million. We make a really insignificant tweak to the emergency appropriations. The reference to fund balance, I think, is archaic and isn't really good public policy or good financial policy. And then finally, that there would be an outlet, a safety valve, to get initial project approved by going to the planning commission and the county council. So we'll submit that as approval.
I have handouts.
Thank heavens. We haven't had one.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for this. So this is the first one that is 710 that you're familiar with. And all we did was make reference to the 2 other sections and say it's annual. So it's the same 2.5 million. And you'll see the underlinings and the bold language. Give me one of those back so I have it for my file. There should be plenty for each of you. See how that worked? See that language? Okay, let's go to the second one. This is the emergency appropriation. Yes.
Rick, you want to just give a quick overview? If that's
Yeah.
okay, Mr. Chairman?
Here's the second one. This is the emergency appropriation section. And I'm going to just paraphrase what the mayor said. 2.5 is fine on an annual basis, provided that some mechanism exists to deal with emergencies and high priority items. You can't go to a referendum if it's truly an emergency. There's no time for this. So, although the language in the current 7-5 section looks like, and you can see it's deleted, has lines through it, it looks like the way you're going to fund this is to be determined by the council. It looks like it's almost telling you don't have to go to referendum, but it didn't say it. So I made it clearer that no, you're not going to go to a referendum for an emergency because it's an emergency. So that's that one. Do you have this, Glenn? Would you like to?
Councilman in the back.
Okay. And of course, we can have more copies made if we need them. And then that leaves and going back to the first one, 710, you'll see, makes reference to 7.5. That's what you just got in the emergency. And it makes reference also to 7.3E, which already exists. That's the capital program section or subsection of the charter. But this added some language talking about this 10% of the program that can be characterized by the Planning Commission on 2/3 vote as being a high priority item. And that's the part that the mayor is suggesting that you treat differently.
So it's almost three-tiered. 2.5 million can be yes.
With it's an annual cap.
Is the annual
of
cap.
2.5.
Then there's emergencies.
Emergencies, which I've never used that section of the charter, because it's a little vague, and, rather than fight the battle about how to do it, we just try to do that. And then the third piece would be, but this will clean up the emergency section, but again, you'll still have to go to the council, you gotta get 2/3 vote. There's a public hearing section, there's public participation in that. And then the third piece would be in the capital improvement side, with the assumption that the public works director, the mayor, along with input from the director of planning, would develop this high priority capital list. They could fund it, or they don't have to. I mean, there's not you're going to look at, typically in our budgeting process, we're going to look at our debt service and say, can we afford to take on more debt? Or no, we can't. We may have to pass on it. We may defer it. You could very well get back to that. Your 2.5 million, as I mentioned earlier, one bridge is going to cost you $1.5 million. So, and probably to pay 4 roads, you'll spend $1 million. You know, that's it. So this is more for the roofs, the boilers, the roughly $350 to $400 million of work that we've identified that's at crisis proportions to, it can wait.
Could you hold, Mr. Mayor?
And it's designed for long-term infrastructure improvements, boilers, roofs, things of that nature. Drainage, which is a huge issue. And so that's your safety valve, that's your outlet, if there becomes a project that isn't quite an emergency, that you want to go to the planning commission and go to the council and have a full vetting. A mayor could opt to include that as part of their capital budget plan along with the 2.5 million, or say, no, we're gonna pass this year, we're in pretty good shape, maybe next year we're gonna do it. You still would have to go and bond the big projects, the police stations, the elementary schools, those kinds of things that require a lot of public discussion and public input.
So the estimated cost of all projects on this list shall not exceed 10% of the estimated cost of all projects contained within the capital improvements program.
Correct.
That's our capital budget, yes?
That's right, the back of the budget book, that's
And that, right now, what is that number?
It's probably $330 million.
So this would be another 30 million.
Yeah, but let me just say, it's not to exceed, meaning that's the worst case scenario. What you would do is you would cherry pick probably 3 or 4 of the top tiered projects, if you were gonna do this, assuming that it was a strong economy and things were humming along, and then present those things to the council. It doesn't require you to do this. It simply says you can't exceed this number. Now you could, if you want, you could lower that to 5%. I'm not wedded to that. My concern is just being able to do, on a rolling basis, the projects that we've identified that have to get done, and that won't ever have to be done again for another 20 years or so. So, I mean, that's one of the challenges that we've had over the last 30 years, is that we haven't had a rolling capital improvement plan, and that's why we get the idea.
Would these all be 20-year projects? So all this bonding would be 20 years. There wouldn't be 5-year projects in there or 10-year?
No, you could put, you wouldn't need, right, you could put that right in there if you wanted to. I mean, certainly you could say, I think 10 and 20 years is standard. We do 5-year notes, but you would leave that over on the other side of the budget. So if you even wanted to write that in there and say you can only be used for 10 or 20-year notes, that's fine by me. I don't think it makes a difference to me.
Okay. Interesting. Questions or comments from anybody? What do you? All right, the commission's in trouble, Peter's smiling.
Just a thought out there, if you don't want to do it, don't do it.
Yep.
But,
No, we appreciate
the
that.
idea was to try to hear a little bit from what folks are saying about capping, but also provide, again, a safety outlet where that project doesn't quite come to a crisis and meet the standard of an emergency, that has to get done.
Okay. We have the mayor here. Any other questions or comments about this in particular?
Do you think this proposal is better than the amendment that we've made to 7-2?
I think that.
Or it's just more political,
Well,
politically palatable? I mean,
Yeah, I think, look, I think the concern that I have is that when we have to get ratification by the residents of the city at this process, right? And my concern is that people will take this and say, look, you're giving the mayor and the council a blank check to go out and spend whatever they want without any voter input or whatever. And I think the idea of it was here was to provide some checks and balances, because under the current language, you could go out and bond 2.5 million, 2.5 million, 2.5 million, 2.5 million. You could do that. I can tell you that we try to bond less money, not bond more money. I mean, that's the objective. When we're looking at our indebtedness, we don't run around and go, geez, how can we borrow more money? But the point here is that we have to develop a real capital improvement plan. We don't have that. We've never had that in the city. We have a capital improvement plan in the back of the book, but it's a joke because everybody knows it never gets funded. Or if we do fund it, we're only going to fund a couple of projects. This year we funded 2.5 million of those projects, and people felt that everybody should be voting on it. And I think
why doesn't it get funded? I don't mean to interrupt.
because it puts too much stress on your operating budget. Because you're on a 2-year term. So mayors don't want to put, 3 bridges in there that's going to raise your taxes 2 mils. I mean, that's the reality of what we're dealing with. Now, in a 4-year term, Paul, see, a mayor would be willing to do that.
But it talks about the common council should have the power of authorizing this.
Yeah, they do.
Why is everybody focusing on the mayor and the mayor's office when, in fact, my point is...
You got to get 2/3 vote, absolutely.
Yeah,
You need 14 votes.
And if the public has a problem, they talk to their elected official.
And
they don't even have to go to your office.
No. And in the last budget process, what we saw, both Republicans and Democrats were split on certain projects. They all got 14 votes, which is 2/3, but, some Democrats voted for some Republicans didn't, some Republicans voted for others, and Democrats, and they're sort of all over the map when you looked at who voted what and where. And that's because people were making decisions based on what they thought was important, what they thought needed to get done, what might be in their ward. I mean, that's always a consideration for some elected officials. So there's no question that, they could go to their council and say, look, we need that school roof on King Street, and I want you to vote for it. Or I want you to vote against it because I don't want to pay for the roof on King Street because those kids go to Danbury.
Well, Mr. Mayor, but we could also just package the top 5 priority items in any given year and do a bond issue that goes to referendum.
You certainly...
you could do that every year. That could be a policy. You could go through and look at that, and the city could have a policy of putting on every November a referendum for bonding. We've never done it in our history. Regularly appeared in front of the voters and said, hey, we have to regularly replace the roofs of our schools. Our public buildings are falling down because, we haven't done this on a regular basis. We haven't given the voters a chance to say yay or nay to big projects like that fix a lot of little things with big bond issues.
That's certainly an option to do that, Peter. I think the issue becomes a couple of things. One is that we elect our representatives. Remember, this is an elected representative body to make these decisions. Going to the voters on a roof seems kind of silly. Your government should be fixing the roofs. Going to the voters on a police station is what the voters should be having input. It's a big project. It's a lot of money. We're all going to be having to pay for that for years to come. So I think there's a differentiation about constantly going to the voters every fall to go on small projects. That's what the council gets elected to do. And if you don't like the council doing that, you vote them out of office. The flip side to that is that there could be years when you don't want to go. Maybe financially our bonding is going by our policy level that we set. Maybe the bond market isn't where you want it to be. You don't want anything that's going to require you to do it because then there may be years we opt not to do it. I certainly am not going to come in next year with $20 million worth of bonding. If this were to be on, since this was in the charter, based on what the environment is out there and what the impact that would be to the taxpayers, it's just something we can't afford right now. So, that decision, I think, that's what we elect policymakers to do, is to make those decisions, which I think is also my way back when.
Yeah, I think for us to tie your hands and the common council's hands, and that's why we've empowered you to do it. And give them a chance to do it. Otherwise, we sit here and say we know better now than if this decision has to be made in 3 years. I don't think so. I certainly support the redrafting of the emergency programs. I think it's a point well taken. It's a lot clearer.
Okay, any other questions for the mayor? Thank you very much.
Thanks, I appreciate your indulgence, and I appreciate all the work you guys are doing on this. I know it's kind of fun, but it's also a lot of headaches, so you're doing a good job.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will.
Did we get to that part?
We didn't do the fun part yet. All right, we will get.
It's coming. Oh, thanks.
This, Peter, could we add this to our agenda for the next meeting, please? Because I think we're gonna wanna read this and
Read it.
think this through a little bit.
Mhm.
Okay, next item on our agenda was you received a sheet with topics that we thought we were going to take a look at some point in time. Referred to as the sheet dated June 23rd, '08. I would like to remind the commissioners, we have met 12 times. We have 10 more meetings. So I do think that we are starting to run out of time, and we have several things that we need to get through. So we should take a look at these items. If you remember, when we started with our first public session, we took everybody's input, anything that was recommended to us that we look at, and made a list of it. And I think, unless we've missed something, that these were the things that we said that we at least wanted to take a look at. And you'll see a bunch of those things on that list we've taken care of in one way, shape, or form. Obviously, the city clerk and treasurer, planning and zoning is done. Municipal elections at this point. One of our questions was, we were gonna review city departments' responsibilities, the entire organization, including titles and things like that. And I think we started to look at that and thought that might be a little daunting. Do we still wanna go into that section? I think we did the section 6-9, the changes to the police department as recommended by the chief of police. We have not done that yet, so
No.
then, if we could we put that on the agenda for the next meeting?
Sure.
Then, if you look under other items, these were primarily recommendations from the public. Lowering percentage of signatures required for referendum. Do we want to discuss that in an agenda, on a future agenda? Penalties for violating the charter. Process for removing elected officials. I think we've learned that we really can't do that. Revised capital budget timing and process. We can't do that. Language dealing with city indebtedness, I think the mayor just gave us another proposal that we will take a look at. So I think we've kind of done that. Preambles, we have not done that. I know that there's been quite a bit of work put into that. Do you want to do that tonight, or should we put that on a future agenda?
Next meeting.
There we go.
Let's take a lot of different things and just put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and maybe if we can work through it tonight.
Okay. We were going to talk about language for requiring specific timing for appointing a charter revision, just so that you don't have to necessarily wait 20 years. Do we want to do a section-by-section change? We can eliminate that. Okay. And I'm not going to get into the page 2 that had people's names on it. I didn't want
Yes.
that out. We will get
Okay.
to that. Okay. So then, do we want to have a discussion around lowering referendum requirements?
I-
No, I think
You
it's
don't?
uncomfortable.
I don't think so. In my mind, that's related to the terms of office. If we decided that issue, then I don't think.
You would, so you don't even want to have a discussion of it?
I don't think
That's
it
the
merits
sense.
it. I mean, if we
Then-
kept longer, if we changed the terms, I would have wanted to discuss that.
Okay. You could bring up the change of terms.
Yeah, I can bring that up again?
Yeah, we'll do it. It's never finalized till we voted 2 or 3 times.
That's true.
How about, sorry, Warren.
Messy process.
Yeah.
I want to say, I heard reference to the county council many times, and I don't know.
Um,
Everybody else knows.
What about considering including penalties for violating the charter?
No.
So we're
No.
not doing that?
No, it doesn't merit.
Okay. Revised capital budget timing and process. We have something, we don't want to look at that, especially now if we're going to, was thinking it would work well with this,
With that.
with the new,
I honestly think that the bonding issue is getting far more time than other issues, and it doesn't really involve the operation of the city government and how the different agencies match, as the council deals with everybody else. I mean, I don't think it has to do as much with the efficient operation of the city of Danbury, the bonding issue. It's a political decision.
if I could speak for Bob King, and I know I won't speak as well as he would, but if I could, I think he is, I know, very concerned about the capital budget and the process that we have for it, and primarily because we can't fund the capital budget. I think it is really getting short shrift, and I think that Mr. Levy was referring to that because we're not funding it, no one's spending a lot of time working with it. So that if the council could get it sooner so that they could put together a process, and if we adopt these changes, where there's really gonna be a real live capital budget with funding, it might make that process a little more efficient.
I believe, unlike that, I mean, my opinion is it's a political process of political will. If the legislative branch, the council, as a body, wanted to talk about the capital budget, they could. And the mayor, I mean, it seems like in Danbury at least, the capital budget has always been neglected for the reason the mayor clearly laid out tonight. A 2-year term, everybody wants to keep their taxes low and everybody happy so they can get reelected. And that's a political issue, not necessarily a wording issue of the charter.
But didn't Warren make a point that the timing of the mayor's release of the capital budget gave you no time, and that the charter needs to be amended, maybe because he is allowed to, abuse is the wrong word, but allowed to manipulate it, so manipulate it so that it best serves. That's what piqued my interest, I guess, when Mr. Levy was talking. I don't know, it has nothing to do with the bonding, I don't think. I think it has everything to do with whether the mayor's office can control whether the legislative body can either consider it or not. And maybe I've got it wrong, and maybe we gotta talk to him again, or maybe I gotta talk to him individually, but that's where I was.
I'll tell you what.
I think you're on track. I don't wanna.
My point is, I don't disagree with Peter, but I don't.
More attention has to be paid to the capital budget as part of the overall budgeting process.
I'll tell you what, Paul, why don't you meet with Mr. Levy?
Okay.
And come back, and if we need to look at it.
Why
Because
don't
if
you call us, and then before the next meeting, if we think we need to put on an
Yeah.
agenda.
Okay, and I think it comes down to, because again, if the council can simply say to the mayor, we want it sooner, it's a political process. The less we put in here
Right.
by rule is, I think, more
If their
flexible.
hands aren't tied to do that, then I don't wanna touch it, but
Right.
if he's saying
Okay.
that somebody could manipulate it, then
Okay.
maybe we gotta fix it.
Are we gonna cross off, consider including a process for granting favorable tax status in the charter?
Yeah. Do you know what that means?
I thought that was if we were going to give a project special tax abatements, that it was gonna have to be bonded or something
Right.
along those lines.
Yes.
Someone was concerned that,
Yes, well, the BRT proposal, where they,
so they were given a tax abatement, and someone
Yes.
thought it needed to be bonded if we were doing that, so.
and it was also, then they changed
Yeah, I don't know if.
what they were doing, and should the tax abatement continue along with it.
I don't think it's a short.
I don't think it's.
That's
no.
really the question.
Yes.
Okay, but at least, and again, if anyone finds a reason or just different understanding, wants to bring it back, I'm happy to bring it back. Discuss or consider public input on borrowing subject to referendum. I think we're doing that. Preambles. So let's, for the next meeting, could we add that to the agenda? So that we will look at the preambles, so that Thomas Jefferson Comstock can tell us what she's written so far. Include language requiring specific timing for a charter review commission. Let's put that on there in case we really think we've done such a great job that it'll have to be revisited every 15 minutes.
You want your political
So-
career
so-
to be on the charter revision.
So what
We've
we're talking about
revised it
is-
already.
I'm sorry, we're gonna put, we're gonna just discuss language to include in the charter requiring
Yeah.
a periodic review.
Yeah, as I think about it already, I'm thinking, what a dumb idea that is, let the mayor call the charter revision if we need it, but let's, we said we were gonna review it. And then the final piece will be, we'll review all of the charter changes made to date for the purpose of cleaning up any loose ends and re-voting on everything we voted on so far in case we changed our minds.
So,
I missed that.
Can we circle back to the organization review?
That's
Have
right.
we decided not to do that, or, I would like to just, not spend a whole lot of time on reorganizing departments, but just modernize the names of the departments and just, because I think we still have, civil prepared, or, I think that we
We
don't
do
have
have-
modern names for the departments, and I forget what it was,
I guess my concern is can we get to all this, and is that affecting the work of the city? That's my primary
Well, there
concern.
are some
But the
things that
fact
we were
is,
asked to change, like change the department to the Homeland Security, because there is funding that only goes to Homeland Security departments, and our
Is there
civil
specific-
preparedness doesn't get it.
I think we worked on that one already.
yeah,
I thought we
that
did.
piece we
But
did.
there's some stuff like what's happened to the departments of Public Works and Parks and Recreation, where in an effort to save some money, I think jobs were combined and the line between those two departments were blurred. So I think that if you choose to do so, I think there's some work that could be done to change charter language so that this document reflects what's going on here. Because right now, it probably doesn't in all respects. In some respects.
Let's do that, because the more we can eliminate from the charter, the simpler it's gonna be to run the city, the more flexibility for the future. Because again, what we're finding is if you say we have a city clerk, you have one, whether that position does what it's supposed to do or doesn't do, and then obviously council slides in people underneath it to do the work, so, okay. We will do that. Don't make me do it in October, I wanna be done. Okay.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it.
Any
I
other
think there are
questions?
some-
I thought you were gonna be in Italy in October.
I am gonna be in Italy in October. Yes, sir.
Maybe it would be helpful to kind of work backwards from your deadline, which is the end of this year.
Yes.
You have to submit a report to the common council, a draft report, January 1st.
Yep.
So you have to prepare the draft report, give yourselves enough time, and you have to have a public hearing, don't forget, before you submit. It's nice to see what's check that. But I know you have to have one at the beginning, which you have, and one at the end, and then the council has to have one. But you have to do that. You have to write the draft report. Give yourself enough time to look at it and say, oh, we gotta change that. And I just don't want to see you on December 15th going nuts.
You won't.
Oh, good.
You know what, that's.
He'll have
So
left
just-
town by then.
All I'm saying is, maybe now is not the right time, but at some point soon, you ought to think about the end game a little bit and how you want to position yourself, so when you get there, you can be as thoughtful and calm as you are now.
And I will tell the commissioners, we do have a meeting scheduled for November 24th, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving, which I can't imagine is gonna work out real well for folks. Our last meeting is scheduled to be December 8th, which means we need to be drafting a report starting probably in October for us to run it by our November meeting, our November 10th meeting. So if that's the case, we are at July 14th, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings before our October meetings, in which case, at the time of which we would probably want to at least start drafting. So we're really down to 5 meetings. That would give us 2 meetings in October, probably 1 meeting in November, assuming we don't want to meet the week of Thanksgiving, and a final meeting on December 8th, so.
And when is the public hearing? It has to be in December after a final, or is that?
I don't think we set a time for the final public hearing, so that's gonna have to be another agenda.
Does that have to be before the end of the year, though, the public hearing?
It's, well, let me,
We need to have a discussion.
193?
Officers.
Commissioners,
About the calendar.
Okay,
Two public hearings, one prior to
Present it
beginning,
the commission.
got it.
one after the commission has completed the draft report, but before submitting it to appointing authority. And then you have appointing authority shall have a public hearing
That's their,
that's the appointing authority.
it's the council.
Appointing authority may recommend changes to the draft within 50 days after the last hearing. That's not us, right?
Right.
That's the county.
Right, and they can make recommendations back to you, and then you submit a final report. But for right now, think about the possibility that you're going to approve or you're going to have a draft report, and it's going to go to public hearing. And then you might want to consider what you heard, and leave open the possibility you're going to make changes to it as a result of what you heard.
But,
So-
and all that has to be done before the end of this calendar year.
Yes.
And then I think if we operate on the assumption that we might have 5 more meetings to do that before we get into drafting and public session.
Yep.
Okay?
And frankly, I think you did a great job tonight in moving along some of narrowing the scope of what you have left to do.
That's because Warren was here and
I think that was it.
that's what we were inspired.
Margaret, I
And
can
this
see
is
Margaret.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Margaret,
Mhm.
This is Mitchell.
Okay. Anything else for the good and welfare of the city of Danbury? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any comments? I'll try your minds. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're unanimous.
Your letter,
How we doing,
Thank
Tom?
you, thank you.
did you want this,
Serious business takes place when everybody else